The square smelled of iron, damp stone, and something darker, fear wrapped in cruelty. Marian held her daughter's hand tighter as they pressed through the restless crowd, each man and woman craning to see the spectacle on the platform. A life was for sale today, and the villagers had come to revel in it. Some came out of curiosity, others out of malice, but all of them hungered for the same thing: the degradation of the prisoner who stood shackled before them. He was enormous. Even slumped as he was, his shoulders were wide enough that the sheriff beside him looked like a child. Rusted iron shackles bit into his wrists, the chains dangling heavy and wet with blood. His clothes, if they could still be called that, hung in tatters, the fine weave ruined by dirt, sweat, and the violence of too many beatings. But it wasn't the wounds or the grime that held Marian's gaze. It was his silence. He did not beg. He did not curse. He stood tall, proud, his chin lifted as though he were on a battlefield instead of a wooden stage. And then, as though pulled by some unseen string, his eyes turned toward her. They were the color of a winter sky, startling blue, cold, endless. They fixed on her with such piercing intensity that she nearly forgot to breathe. The sheriff's voice rang out, oiled with false confidence. "A northern raider caught stealing from the king's lands. 3 days have passed and no ransom has come. Today the law demands restitution, 6 silver coins or his service until the debt is paid. Who will bid?" A hush rippled across the square. The man was strong, yes, but he was dying. Everyone could see the way his body swayed ever so slightly, as though it would collapse the moment pride loosened its grip. No one wanted to buy a corpse, no matter how broad his back. The sheriff tried again, lowering the price to 4 silver, then 3. Laughter broke out, jeers tossed into the air like stones. "He'll slit your throat in your sleep," someone shouted. Another hurled an actual rock, striking his already wounded shoulder. The prisoner flinched for the first time, and the crowd roared in approval at their small victory. Marian's stomach turned. The cruelty of her neighbors, their delight in another's suffering, made her want to scream. And yet she couldn't look away, because even as he winced, even as blood seeped down his arm, the Highlander's eyes remained locked on hers. There was no plea there, no despair, only defiance, dignity, and beneath it something she could not name, something that reached across the space between them and touched the quietest part of her soul. 2 silver, the sheriff barked, his face darkening with frustration. 2 silver for a body stronger than 10 of you combined. A bargain, I say. No one moved. The villagers were content to gawk and laugh, but none would claim him. And then, before she even knew she was speaking, Marian heard her own voice break the silence. "I'll take him." The words dropped into the square like stones into a still pond. Shock rippled outward. Heads turned, eyes widened, and the sheriff's mouth curled in disbelief. "Marian," he said, his tone clipped and dangerous. "You cannot be serious." "I am." Her voice trembled, but only slightly. 2 silver coins. Final offer, as you said." Gasps shuddered through the crowd. Her daughter's small hand squeezed hers, not in fear, but in excitement. "Mama," George whispered, her eyes wide with awe. "You're saving him." Her knees nearly gave way. Saving him. She was a widow with barely enough coin to keep bread on the table. What did she think she was doing? And yet she could not step back. She could not let him fall into the hands of men who would beat him until his last breath. The sheriff's face went red above his beard, fury simmering beneath his forced smile. But there were too many witnesses, and the law was clear. With a growl of rage, he snatched the coins from her hand. "So be it," he spat. "But when he murders you in your sleep, don't come crying to me." Marion climbed the steps, her legs wooden, her heart hammering. Up close, the prisoner was even larger, towering over her, though his strength seemed to waver. His skin was mapped with bruises and lacerations, the strange wound on his shoulder spreading dark veins that pulsed with unnatural sickness. Still, when she reached out to him, offering her arm for support, he accepted with careful dignity. His lips moved, words flowing in a language she did not understand. Gaelic, the tongue of the Highland clans. But his eyes, oh, his eyes, spoke gratitude deeper than any words could. The crowd hissed and muttered as she helped him down. "Highland dog," someone spat. "Witch woman bought herself a savage." Marion ignored them, her jaw tightening. He was not a beast. He was a man. And now, for better or worse, he was hers. The walk home should have taken 10 minutes. It stretched into an eternity. Each step was a test of endurance, for him, for her. He leaned heavily against her, his weight nearly buckling her smaller frame. Yet pride kept him from collapsing outright. Behind them, she could feel the eyes of the villagers burning holes in her back, their judgment louder than any words. Her daughter, bright as always, chattered with innocent curiosity. "Mamma, ask him if he's seen the great locks. Do you think all Highland men are so tall? He looks like a storybook giant." "George, hush." Marion's voice was sharp, though her heart softened at the child's wonder. "Don't speak to him." But the prisoner glanced down at the little girl, and for the first time, something in his expression softened. He murmured a few syllables, gentler this time, his voice like music woven from storm and stone. George beamed as though she understood him. By the time they reached her cottage at the edge of the village, his steps faltered. He paused, his gaze flickering from her small home to the dark line of the forest beyond. She could almost see the calculation in his eyes. Freedom, if he could make it to the trees. "You can go," she whispered, releasing his arm. She pointed toward the forest. "I won't stop you." He stared at her, not understanding the words, but perhaps the meaning. For one heartbeat she thought he might actually run, and part of her, frightened, weary, almost wished he would. But then his knees buckled, and he crumpled into the dirt. "Is he dead?" George gasped. "No." Marion dropped to her knees, pressing her ear to his chest. Relief flooded her at the faint thrum of a heartbeat. "He lives. Help me get him inside." Together they dragged his heavy body through the doorway, laying him by the hearth. Up close, in the dim firelight, the wound on his shoulder looked worse than before, black veins crawling across his chest like frost spreading over glass. Marion's healer's instincts screamed in alarm. What poison was this? What weapon could create such a curse? Hours passed in a blur of boiling water, grinding herbs, whispered prayers. She brewed teas, pressed poultices, cleaned the wound with honey and willow bark. Her hands moved with the muscle memory of generations, though her heart pounded with fear. None of it seemed to help. His fever raged on, his breathing shallow. She dozed fitfully in her chair, waking at every sound, her mind torn between despair and stubborn resolve. And then, just before dawn, his eyes opened. No longer winter blue, but molten gold. Marian froze, the cup of willow tea slipping from her fingers. His hand shot up, strong despite his weakness, cupping her cheek. His skin burned against hers, yet the touch was achingly gentle. Words spilled from his lips, incomprehensible, yet filled with reverence, as though he were speaking to something precious. "What are you?" she whispered. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her skin. His nose brushed her throat, and then pain, sharp, searing, teeth sinking into her flesh. She gasped, the sound choked, her body jerking. Instinct screamed at her to fight, but her hands betrayed her, clutching at his shoulders instead of pushing him away. Heat spread from the wound, coursing through her veins like fire. Pain transformed into something else, terrible, overwhelming, intoxicating. Her breath came in ragged gasps as the world narrowed to his mouth at her throat. His arm locked around her waist, the wild, primal connection sparking like lightning through her very soul. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. He collapsed against the blankets, unconscious once more, leaving her trembling, bleeding, forever changed. Marian staggered to the wash-basin, pressing a cloth to the bite. Already it was clotting, the flesh knitting faster than any wound should, but the real change was inside her. Heat coiled in her chest, spreading outward until every bone, every muscle felt aflame. She crumpled to the floor, her body convulsing as though being torn apart from within. "What did you do to me?" she thought, even as darkness claimed her. When she woke, the world was different. The wound on her neck was nearly gone, a faint ache all that remained. The Highlander lay pale and still, dying by the fire. And yet, when she looked at him, her heart twisted with something she had no words for, something terrifying in its intensity. She had saved him, and he had marked her. Neither of their lives would ever be the same. The fire burned low, painting the cottage walls in trembling amber light. Marian's breath misted in the chill dawn, her body still aching from the night's ordeal. She pressed her hand to her throat, half expecting to find ragged flesh, but the skin was whole, faintly tender, marked only by the memory of his teeth. Every time her fingers brushed the spot, her chest tightened with a confusion of fear and longing. He lay before the hearth, his chest rising and falling shallowly, his lips cracked with fever. She knelt beside him, her basket of herbs spread open, every remedy she knew already exhausted. The poison had a will of its own, threads of black and silver spreading across his shoulder like roots of some malignant tree. No poultice, no tea, no charm of whispered words could stop it. She felt powerless, and yet she could not look away. "Why him?" she murmured to the silence. "Why you, of all people?" The Highlander stirred, a sound escaping his throat, low, guttural, a fragment of words she could not understand. His eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she thought he might wake, but his body shuddered instead, slipping deeper into the fever. George padded into the room, her hair wild from sleep, her eyes wide with childish curiosity. She crouched near the giant sprawled across their floor, tilting her head as though studying some strange creature. "Is he going to die, Mamma?" The bluntness of the question cut into Marian's heart. She forced a steady tone. "Not if I can help it." Her daughter frowned, glancing at the prisoner with unexpected sympathy. "He's not scary when he sleeps. He looks lonely." Marion swallowed hard. She wanted to say it was foolishness, that Highlanders were brutal raiders, that they deserved no pity. But the words stuck in her throat. She saw what her daughter saw, the fragility beneath the strength, the quiet humanity even in unconsciousness. By afternoon, Marion's hands trembled from fatigue. She ground herbs with too much force, her jaw tight, her heart aching with helplessness. Every remedy failed. The fever would not break. And then George whispered the words Marion had dreaded since the day her mother died. "Mamma, maybe you should use the gift." The pestle froze in Marion's hand. "Don't say that." "But you told me once." "I told you never to speak of it." Her voice cracked like a whip. George flinched, but she held her mother's gaze bravely. "He's dying," she whispered, "and you're crying." Marion lifted her hand to her cheek and found it wet. Tears she hadn't realized were falling. The sight of her daughter's solemn face, the weight of the Highlander's failing breath, broke something inside her. "Bar the door," she whispered. "Close the shutters. No one must see." George obeyed without question, bolting the cottage as though they were hiding from soldiers. Marion knelt beside the Highlander, her palms hovering over his wound. For years she had buried the warmth, smothered the power her grandmother had warned her never to reveal. But now she reached for it, trembling as she opened the door inside herself. It came like a rising tide, heat spreading from her chest down her arms until her palms glowed faintly in the dim light. She pressed them to his shoulder, and the clash was immediate. Darkness rose to meet her, oily and malevolent, fighting back against her gift. She gasped. The air sucked from her lungs, but she pressed harder. Light against shadow, healing against poison. For a heartbeat, she thought she would be consumed. But then something surged from him, wild, primal, like the howl of a wolf under a full moon. Their energies touched, collided, and something ancient flared between them. Recognition, a thread snapping taut between her soul and his. The black veins recoiled, retreating from the wound as though burned. His breath hitched, colour slowly seeping back into his cheeks. Marion sagged forward, her body trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Mama," George whispered, throwing her arms around her waist. "You saved him." "Never again," Marion murmured fiercely. "Do you hear me? Never again must anyone know." But the glow still lingered faintly on her palms, betraying the truth. By evening, he stirred. Marion was bent over her herbs when she felt his eyes on her. She turned, and their gazes collided. No fever now, only clarity, those winter blue eyes fixed on her with bewilderment. He struggled to sit, his movements careful, wary. His lips shaped words, Gaelic again, questioning, insistent. "You're safe," she said softly, though she knew he couldn't understand. "I'm a healer. You were dying." At her touch, his gaze sharpened. For a heartbeat, she thought he might reach for her, but instead he sagged back against the hearth, exhaustion still heavy in his frame. Later, when she handed him a bowl of stew, their fingers brushed. A jolt shot through her like lightning, startling her so badly she nearly dropped the bowl. His eyes widened too, just slightly, and she knew he had felt it. That strange recognition, that bond. "Ewan," he said at last, tapping his chest. She blinked. "Ewan?" He nodded, and when she repeated the name, his smile was devastating. Then he pointed at her. Marion. Her name in his accent, rich and warm, was like a caress. She flushed, scolding herself for the reaction, but the sound lingered in her chest like a secret song. Outside, the night deepened. The wind whispered through the trees. And then George, who had been quiet, stiffened by the window. "Mama," she whispered, "I saw something. In the woods. Wolves." "That's impossible," Marion said quickly. "They don't come near settlements." But Ewan had gone very still. He rose unsteadily, joining George at the shuttered slats. His breath slowed, his shoulders tense. And then he growled. The sound rolled through the cottage like thunder, a sound no human throat should make. Marion froze, her heart hammering. George stared wide-eyed at him. He seemed unaware of their fear, his gaze fixed beyond the glass. Shapes moved in the shadows, large, four-legged, retreating into the trees. Wolves, dozens of them. Before she could process what she had seen, a sharp knock rattled the door. "Marion!" Duncan's voice. The sheriff, angry, insistent. "Open this door!" Her heart sank, but she forced herself to lift the latch. Duncan stormed in, his eyes immediately finding Ewan, his face twisted with rage. "Still alive? What did you do?" "I healed him," Marion said carefully. "With what?" Duncan stepped closer, suspicion sharp in his gaze. "The whole village saw him dying, yet here he stands." "Herbs," Marion lied. "Knowledge passed from my grandmother," he sneered. "Which knowledge?" George, fearless, stepped between them. "Leave Mama alone!" Duncan's expression darkened. "This child needs discipline." He moved toward her, reaching out. Ewan was faster. In a blink, he was on his feet, placing himself between George and the sheriff. His eyes burned with cold fire. Duncan reached for his knife. In an instant, Ewan disarmed him, the blade turned against his throat. "Enough!" Marion cried, stepping between them. "Please, stop! Duncan, he'll be gone by morning. I give you my word." For a moment, violence simmered, the air sharp with danger. Then Ewan flung the knife to the floor. Duncan staggered back, his face pale with fury. "See that he is gone," he snarled. His eyes flicked to George, dark with promise. "We'll speak again about this child's need for a father." The door slammed behind him, rattling the frame. Silence fell heavy. "You have to leave," Marion whispered, turning to Ewan. Her voice cracked, though she fought to keep it firm. "He'll kill you if you stay." He seemed to understand. He gathered what little he had, then paused at the threshold. Slowly, reverently, he took her hand, lifting it to his lips. The kiss was soft, burning. "Thank you," he said in halting English. Her heart stopped, the first word she understood from his mouth. And then, from the shadows of the forest, wolves emerged. Dozens of them, silver and grey, surrounding him in a loose circle. Marion's breath caught in terror. But Ewan only gave them a nod, as though greeting kin. His eyes lingered on hers one last time, filled with regret. before he disappeared into the night, the wolves melting with him into the trees. When the door closed, Marion's hand still tingled where his lips had touched. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of mist and mountains, of golden eyes watching her from the shadows, of arms strong and warm wrapping around her as he whispered words she somehow understood. She woke in her cottage, alone, her body trembling, her heart aching with a yearning she dared not name. For days the dreams returned, fevered visions of Ewan by her side, his voice calling her mate, his lips claiming hers. And always, always, the bond tugging at her chest, relentless. One morning, she looked in the mirror and touched her throat. The bite had faded to faint scars, but the ache beneath the skin never left. Something was changing inside her. She could feel it, in the way her bones throbbed at night, in the way her senses sharpened, in the restless pull toward the forest. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass and whispered to the empty room, "What have you done to me?" But deep in her heart, she already knew the answer. The cottage was hushed, except for the faint crackle of the fire and the steady breathing of her daughter asleep in the loft above. Marion sat alone at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold long ago. Outside, the night pressed against the shutters, heavy and restless, as though the forest itself held its breath. She tried to calm her mind, but her thoughts circled endlessly around one truth she could not escape. Her life was no longer her own. The bite had changed everything. Her body betrayed her daily with strange new aches and surges of heat that left her weak and trembling. At times, she felt her bones strain as though pressing against the skin, as if some other shape long buried was demanding to emerge. She hid the convulsions from George, biting her lip until it bled, whispering prayers until the spasms passed. But each time they returned stronger, each time her fear grew sharper. And then there were the dreams. They came night after night, too vivid to be dismissed as illusions. She wandered through mist-shrouded glens, her bare feet damp with dew. Wolves circled her, silver shapes melting from shadow to shadow, their golden eyes watching with a knowing hunger. And always there was him, Ewan, emerging from the fog, his gaze burning with fierce tenderness, his hands reaching for her as though she was the only thing in the world that mattered. In those dreams, they spoke without words. She heard his voice inside her, low and reverent, calling her mate, heart, soul. She woke each time with tears on her cheeks, her body aching with a longing so sharp it felt like pain. By the third week, she could bear it no longer. She told herself it was foolishness, that she needed air, herbs, distraction. But when she stepped outside at dusk, her feet did not carry her to the garden or the market path. They carried her to the forest's edge. The trees loomed tall and silent, the shadows thick. She hesitated, her breath shallow, then stepped beneath the canopy. Immediately the world changed. Every sound was sharper, the snap of a twig, the flutter of wings high in the branches. Every scent was clearer, the damp moss, the musk of animals, the faint iron tang of the stream nearby. She closed her eyes, dizzy, as the night whispered secrets she had never noticed before. And then she felt it, the bond. It tugged at her chest like an invisible thread, pulling her deeper into the woods. Her heart raced, torn between fear and surrender. She should turn back, she told herself. George was waiting at home. Duncan's threats still hung over her like a noose, but the bond pulled again, insistent, and she followed. The forest seemed endless. Branches clawed at her cloak, roots tangled her steps, but she pressed forward until she stumbled into a small clearing bathed in moonlight, and there, on the far side, he stood. Ewan. His broad frame was cloaked in shadow, his eyes catching the light like molten gold. For one breathless moment, neither moved. Then she whispered his name, and his head lifted as though the sound itself had called him back from the abyss. "Marion!" Her knees nearly gave way. The word was halting, accented, but unmistakable. He had learned it. He had remembered. He crossed the clearing slowly, every step measured, his gaze never leaving hers. She wanted to run to him, to collapse into his arms, but fear rooted her in place. Fear of what he was, fear of what she was becoming. When he reached her, his hand lifted hesitantly, as though he feared she would vanish if he touched her. She trembled, caught between flight and surrender, then leaned into his palm when it finally cupped her cheek. The heat of his skin seared her, yet it felt like home. For a long time neither spoke. The forest held its breath, as though the trees themselves honored their silence. Then Ewan's thumb brushed her jaw, his gaze fierce with emotion. He said something in Gaelic, a cascade of syllables like music, his tone thick with longing. She did not understand the words, but she felt them. Her heart answered before her mind could resist. "Why me?" she whispered. "Why did you mark me?" He flinched, guilt flashing across his face. His hand dropped, his shoulders sagging beneath some invisible weight. He tried to speak again, but his words stumbled, his voice breaking. At last he stepped back, shaking his head as though condemning himself. "No," she said, her voice urgent. She reached for him, catching his wrist. The contact jolted them both. His eyes snapped to hers, and in that moment she knew he was as bound to her as she was to him. Whatever had begun with his fevered bite had tethered them together, soul to soul, flesh to flesh. Her throat tightened, her eyes burning. "I feel it too." Something broke in him then. He pulled her against his chest, his arms crushing around her, his breath ragged against her hair. She buried her face in him, inhaling the wild, clean scent of earth and pine and smoke that clung to his skin. It was the scent from her dreams, the scent that had haunted her nights. They clung to each other as though the world might tear them apart at any moment, and perhaps it would. When at last he pulled back, his hands lingered at her waist, his forehead resting against hers. He whispered more Gaelic, softer now, a confession carried on trembling breath. She could not translate, but she knew what it was. His apology, his plea, his vow. She answered not with words, but with a trembling kiss pressed to his chest over the steady beat of his heart. His breath caught, his body stiffening as though her touch burned him, and then he cradled her face and kissed her in return. It was not gentle, it was desperate, hungry, the collision of two souls who had been circling each other since the moment she'd spent her last coins on him. His mouth claimed hers with a wild reverence, a promise and a surrender all at once. She melted into him, her fears dissolving beneath the flood of heat that surged through her veins. When they broke apart, breathless, the bond thrummed between them like a living thing. She knew with terrifying certainty that she could never undo it. And yet, as dawn crept through the trees, reality crashed back around them. She had a daughter to protect. He had a people to lead. Duncan's threats still loomed. The Crown still hunted Highland wolves. He brushed her hair back from her face, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Danger," he said carefully, in his halting English. "For you." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "For us." He pressed a final kiss to her forehead, then stepped back into the shadows. She reached for him, but the bond tugged like a chain, reminding her that though he walked away, he was never truly gone. Marian stumbled home, her lips still tingling, her heart torn. George met her at the door, her small brow furrowed.
"Mamma, you were gone all night."
"I know," Marian whispered, gathering her into her arms. "And I promise you, I'll never leave you again." But even as she spoke, the bond pulsed in her chest, whispering that promise might already be broken. That night, the pain came again, worse than before. She collapsed on the floor, biting her fist to keep from screaming. Her body arched, bones cracking, skin burning as though fire had been poured into her veins. She writhed until darkness swallowed her whole. When she woke, George was weeping beside her. "Mamma, you scared me. I thought you died." Marian gathered her close, hiding her tears in her daughter's hair. "Not yet," she whispered. But inside, she wondered how long she could keep fighting what was coming. For every night the dreams returned, and every day the bond grew stronger, until she no longer knew where she ended and Ewan began. She was changing, and there was no turning back. The summons came 3 days later, carried by a rider in the king's livery. Marian's heart clenched the moment she saw the seal, a jagged fear that spread cold through her veins. Duncan's whispers had reached farther than the village. She broke the wax with trembling fingers, and her worst fears spilled out in precise, unyielding script. She was to present herself at the royal castle to answer questions about her healing knowledge. George watched her with wide, frightened eyes as she folded the letter. "Mamma, are they going to hurt you?" Marian forced a smile she did not feel, smoothing her daughter's hair back from her brow. "No, sweetheart. They just want to ask questions. I'll tell them about herbs and poultices, the things my grandmother taught me. Then I'll come home to you." But even as she said it, she remembered the way Duncan's eyes had narrowed, the venom in his voice when he accused her of witchcraft. The Crown would not summon her for mere curiosity. She rode to the castle the next morning, the path stretching endlessly before her, each hoofbeat an echo of dread. The walls rose tall and grim against the sky, the banners snapping in the wind like warnings. She was led through corridors heavy with shadows, until she stood before a man whose presence chilled her more than the stone walls. Master Aldrich, the king's apothecary. His thin lips curved in a smile that never touched his pale eyes. "Ah, Mistress Marian, I have heard fascinating reports." She sat as commanded, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. "I know something of herb lore," she said carefully. "Herb lore," he echoed, the word twisting on his tongue like mockery. "Yes, that's what they all say." He circled her chair, a predator studying prey. "A Highland prisoner, poisoned with my most perfected formula, should have perished within hours. Yet under your care he lives. How remarkable!" Marian's breath caught. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. "Sometimes the body heals itself," she whispered. "In one night?" His voice cracked like a whip. He leaned close, his breath hot against her ear. "Don't lie to me. I know what you are." Her blood ran cold. He drew a cloth from a covered table, revealing a corpse stretched across it. A Highland warrior, his skin crawling with the same black veins she had seen in Ewan's wound. "Beautiful work, isn't it?" Aldrich murmured. "Wolf's bane extract, enhanced alchemically. It kills them in hours. And yet you, witch woman, found an antidote." "I'm no witch," she breathed, horror choking her. "Oh, but you are," he said softly, his smile sharpening. "And you will help me perfect my poison. If you can undo it, I can strengthen it." Marian recoiled, bile rising in her throat. "You're talking about genocide." "I'm talking about pest control," he corrected coldly. When she refused, his smile never faltered. He only gestured, and guards stepped forward. "Then you will be escorted to the forest to gather your precious herbs. You will make your antidote for me, or your daughter will pay the price." Terror clawed at her chest. George. Sweet, fearless George. Marian bowed her head, feigning submission, even as fury burned in her veins. "I'll need specific plants," she whispered. "Ones that don't grow in gardens." Aldrich inclined his head. "So be it. Guards, take her." The forest air was sharp with pine and damp earth as the guards marched her beneath the trees. Every step was agony, her mind racing for escape. And then, from the shadows, Duncan emerged. His badge glinted in the morning light, his eyes gleaming with something darker than duty. "I'll take it from here," he said smoothly. The guards hesitated, but Duncan's smile was all authority. "The apothecary asked me to oversee this personally. You may return to the castle." Reluctantly, they obeyed, leaving her alone with him. Marian's blood chilled. "You told them about me," she whispered. He stepped closer, his gaze hungry. "I saved you. I can still save you. Marry me, Marian. Our lands united, your reputation shielded. George will have a proper father, and you will have my protection. Who else would want a witch for a wife?" Revulsion surged. "Never." His hand shot out, seizing her arm, fingers bruising her skin. "You will," he growled. "You'll thank me when the flames are at your door." Pain lanced through her then, sudden and searing, as if her very bones were breaking. She cried out, collapsing to her knees. Duncan recoiled in shock. What is happening to you?" From the undergrowth, wolves emerged, dozens of them, silver and grey, their eyes glowing like coals. A massive wolf stepped forward, golden eyes burning with primal fire. Marian gasped through the agony, recognition piercing her like a blade. Ewan. The wolves surged as one, their fury unleashed. Duncan drew his sword, but he was no match for them. Marian's vision blurred, her body writhing as the change ripped through her. She glimpsed the silver wolf, his wolf, looming above her, his gaze fierce with concern. And then the world shattered into darkness. She woke to strange stone walls, her body wrapped in blankets that smelled of smoke and heather. Panic flared until a gentle voice soothed her. An elderly Highland woman sat at her side, her hands busy with herbs. "Rest, lass. You've been through much." "Where am I?" "Castle MacFarland," the woman replied. "I am Morag, the clan's healer." Marian's mind reeled. A Highland stronghold. She struggled to rise, fear for George twisting her gut. "My daughter is safe," Morag assured her. "Your wee one is here, well cared for." Relief brought tears to her eyes, but it was short-lived. Another woman entered, younger, noble in bearing, her voice sharp in Gaelic. Morag's face paled at her words. "What is she saying?" Marian whispered. "She's asking who bit you," Morag said grimly. Marian's hand flew to her throat, her heart racing. "Who bit me?" Morag nodded slowly. "That mark. It should have killed you. Only one of our kind could have done it." Before she could respond, footsteps echoed. The door opened, and a tall figure entered. Her breath caught. Ewan, not as a prisoner, not as an outcast, but as a chief. His presence filled the room, commanding deference from those around him. But when his eyes found hers, all titles, all authority fell away. For one heartbeat, he was only a man, raw relief etched across his face. "You're the chief," she whispered, barely believing. He crossed to her side, kneeling as though he could not bear the distance. He took her hand in both of his lips trembling as they brushed her knuckles. Her heart ached with the tenderness in his gaze. But when his eyes flicked to her throat, his expression crumpled. He spoke a single word in Gaelic, urgent, horrified. Morag translated softly, "He's asking if it was him." Tears blurred her vision. She nodded. "Yes." Ewan staggered back as though struck, anguish twisting his features. He pressed his hands to his face, his voice breaking in a torrent of Gaelic. Morag's eyes softened. "He says he should have known, that he claimed you in fevered madness, and now he's destroyed you." Her chest clenched. She reached for him, catching his trembling fingers. "You haven't destroyed me," she whispered, but her voice shook with fear, because Morag's next words carved deep into her soul. "You survived the bite, child. That is a miracle. But if the transformation does not complete, it will kill you." The room spun. Marian clutched Ewan's hand as if it were the only thing anchoring her. His eyes, blue and broken, met hers with a plea for forgiveness she could not bear to hear. And in that moment, with George's laughter faintly drifting from another chamber, Marian understood. The bond was not just a thread tying her to him, it was a noose tightening with every heartbeat. Her fate was sealed. The days that followed blurred into one another, each heavier than the last. Marian's body was no longer her own. Every morning she woke weaker, the ache in her chest spreading outward until it consumed her limbs, her bones, even her breath. At night, fever dreams seized her, dragging her into a world of mist and wolves, of golden eyes that pierced through shadow, of Ewan's voice whispering words she could not understand, but felt with every fibre of her soul. George clung to her hand during the worst of it, her small face pale with worry. "Mama, please don't leave me," she whispered one night when the convulsions racked Marian's body so violently she thought her spine would snap. Marian had no words to give, only the trembling strength of her fingers wrapped around her daughter's. When the pain eased, she would lie still, staring at the beams above, listening to the quiet sounds of the Highland stronghold. Voices in Gaelic drifted through the halls, the scent of wood smoke and heather filling the air. She should have felt like a prisoner here, surrounded by strangers who called her people enemies. And yet, a strange part of her heart whispered that she belonged, that the bond tethering her to Ewan was weaving her into this place, whether she wished it or not. He avoided her at first. She saw him in fleeting glimpses, always at a distance, his face shadowed with guilt. When he entered her chamber, he spoke only to Morag, his words clipped, his eyes never meeting hers. He asked after her condition, but never directly to her. The distance was a blade that cut her more deeply than the bite had, until one night. The fever had come again, worse than before. Marian lay curled on the bed, her breath ragged, her nails digging into the blankets as her body fought against itself. Fire spread through her veins, searing her from within, and she knew with sudden clarity that she was dying. Her magic, the gift she had always feared, was tearing itself apart, trying to hold back the change. The door creaked open. Through the haze, she saw him, Ewan, his face carved with anguish. He crossed the room swiftly, falling to his knees beside her bed. "Marian," he whispered, her name breaking on his tongue. His hand trembled as he brushed damp hair from her brow, his thumb tender against her skin. She sobbed, half from pain, half from the relief of hearing him speak her name again. "Why are you here?" she gasped. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice low and fervent in Gaelic. She could not understand, but she knew, she felt the meaning. "Forgive me, I cannot stay away." Her tears mingled with his as his lips grazed her temple, desperate, reverent. For the first time since the bite, she let herself believe he wanted her, not just because of the bond, not just because fate had tangled them together, but because he could not bear to lose her. The fever broke with the dawn, leaving her weak but alive. When she woke again, Morag sat at her side, her expression grave. "Your magic is fighting the change," the healer said. "It is using all your strength to keep you human. If you continue like this, you'll die." Marian's heart lurched. "Then what must I do?" "Choose," Morag said softly. "Stop fighting, let the wolf take you, or keep resisting and let your magic burn you away." The words lodged in her chest like stones. She thought of George, her sweet child who had already lost so much. She thought of Ewan, the bond that throbbed between them, relentless. She thought of the life she had clung to, the quiet cottage, the herb garden, the fragile peace she had scraped together after widowhood. Could she let it go? Could she surrender to something she barely understood? Morag's eyes softened. "Tonight is the blood moon. If there is ever a chance to survive the change, it is then." That evening they brought her to a circular chamber beneath the castle, the stone walls etched with ancient runes. An altar stood at the centre, worn smooth by centuries of ritual. Torches flickered, shadows dancing across the gathered faces. George stood near Morag, her eyes wide with fear, but her chin held high. Marian's heart broke at the sight of her daughter's bravery. She pulled her close, whispering against her hair, "If I don't survive, you must be strong. Morag and the clan will protect you." George shook her head fiercely, tears streaming down her cheeks. "No, Mama. You'll live." "You have to." The healer stepped forward, a ceremonial blade in hand. "Your blood freely given," Morag translated, "to embrace the wolf within." Marian extended her palms, flinching as the blade sliced her skin. Blood welled and dripped into the stone bowl, mixing with herbs and smoke. The healer murmured words in Gaelic, an incantation older than memory. "Drink," Morag said. Marian hesitated, her gaze darting to the edge of the chamber where Ewan stood. His eyes met hers at last, and she saw raw terror there. He believed she would die. He had already begun mourning her. And yet, behind the fear, she saw something else. A desperate love, a vow unspoken. That was enough. She lifted the bowl and drank. The liquid burned like molten fire, searing her throat, spreading through her veins with the force of a storm. She screamed, her body convulsing as bones cracked and reshaped, muscles tearing and rebuilding. The world blurred, pain consuming everything. She felt herself unraveling, her magic tearing apart against the wolf spirit clawing for dominance. "I'm dying," she thought, the words echoing as her vision dimmed. But then, his hand. Ewan was beside her, his fingers entwined with hers, his face etched with agony. He whispered in Gaelic, his voice breaking as though begging the heavens themselves to spare her. She clung to him, the bond between them flaring like lightning, refusing to let go. Darkness swallowed her whole, and she dreamed. The glen was misty, the air thick with silence. She saw him ahead, walking toward the edge of a cliff that dropped into nothingness. Panic seized her. She ran, catching his arm just as he reached the precipice. "My heart," he whispered, turning to her with tears in his eyes. "I've doomed you. Forgive me." "You haven't doomed me," she cried, clutching him. "You saved me. Don't you see? You're the only thing keeping me alive." His face crumpled. "I claimed you in madness. I poisoned you with my love. I cannot live if you die because of me." Terror flooded her. "Ewan, no!" But he stepped backward into the void, his last words carried on the wind. "I love you. Always." Marian woke with a scream, her chest heaving. Around her, gasps echoed. Morag's voice broke through the haze. "She lives! By the gods! She lives!" George threw herself into her arms, sobbing. "Mama, we thought you were gone. You stopped breathing." Marian held her tightly, tears streaming down her own face. She was alive, but Ewan was not there. "Where is he?" she demanded. The warriors exchanged grim looks. Morag's voice was heavy. "He has gone to the sacred grove for execution." The world tilted. The dream had not been only a dream. He had meant it. He had offered himself up, believing her dead. "No." Marian staggered to her feet, her body weak but burning with newfound strength. "He cannot die believing I'm gone." She stumbled from the chamber, her daughter's cries echoing behind her. Every step was agony, but she forced her body onward, fueled by the bond pulling her like a compass toward him. She fell, rose, and ran again, her vision swimming with tears. At last, something inside her broke. Or perhaps it healed. She stopped fighting. Pain exploded as her body shifted, bones cracking, fur bursting from her skin. She fell forward onto 4 legs, her vision sharpening, sense flooding her senses. Power surged through her veins, wild and unstoppable. She was wolf, Silver-white fur shimmered in the moonlight as she bounded across the Highland hills, faster than any horse, the bond pulling her straight to him. The night air howled past, her paws pounding the earth, her heart a drum of fierce determination. She reached the sacred grove, ancient stones rising like sentinels. The pack surrounded the altar, where Ewan knelt in human form, his head bowed in acceptance as the elder raised a silver axe. Marian leapt into the clearing, shifting back to human form without thought. Her voice rang out, filled with power. "Stop!" Gasps rippled. The elder froze. "The human lives." Ewan's head snapped up, his eyes widening in shock, then flooding with tears. He stumbled to his feet as she pushed through the circle. "I'm here," she whispered, cupping his face in her trembling hands. "I'm alive." He pressed his forehead to hers, his body shaking. Words tumbled from his lips in Gaelic, desperate and raw. She could not translate, but she felt them through the bond. Mine, always mine. Without hesitation, he bared his throat to her, the ancient gesture of trust and invitation. She understood. No words were needed. Her wolf rose, fierce and hungry. She sank her teeth into his flesh, sealing the bond with blood and fire. The world exploded in light and sensation, their souls colliding in a storm of love, pain, and belonging. She felt him inside her, his relief, his devotion, his joy. Mine, her soul howled. Yours, his answered. The pack erupted in howls of celebration. The elder's voice shook with awe. The bond is complete. She lives, the first human to survive the claiming in centuries. Marian looked into Ewan's eyes and saw her own fierce joy reflected there. They were no longer separate, they were one. And for the first time in her life, she was not afraid.